All right, forget this. This is stupid. This is dumb. Okay, obviously change of venue. We're going to talk about React on Rakia, and I am definitely on a couple shots of Rakia right now. That's how I get through my mornings in Bulgaria. So we're going to talk about React, the Facebook technology that doesn't suck. This is what it feels like coding React sometimes. Just quickly about me. This is me and my son at Dia de los Muertos. This is Day of the Dead for the Spaniards, or Mexicans, or whatever. I've been in business 17 years. I've been here since the very beginning. So 9 years. I wrote a book. We do consulting. I invented the internet. And this is our motto to our success. I'll just leave that there. And I know it's not homemade, but it's what I usually get served when I'm here. So it is a favorite for sure. What's your favorite Rakia? Sir? Homemade. It's all homemade, right? Why did you guys not bring me a bottle this year? What's going on?
Next time.
Next time. I've been here 9 years in a row. Next time. I'm still looking forward to getting drunk on the real Rakia. This is my book, WebSocket. As you can tell, it's very complicated. But what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about Rakia. We'll cut that one out, right? We're going to talk about React. And so, what are the key points? It's functional programming. Everything is basically immutable, depending on how you use it. Components are beautiful. And it's JavaScript, but React and Redux with ES6 makes it bearable. Yeah, because JavaScript, we all know, sucks. But ES6 makes it at least a little bit deal-worthy. And Babel helps with all that, the transpiler. This is what it feels like to code in JavaScript today. Painful. But why do I like React? And one of the reasons why is because of Apache Wicked. Who here knows what Wicked is? No? Nobody? It was so sad. This was my first talk in 2009, when most of you were 4. But Wicked was a component-based framework written in Java, and it had Java for the components and HTML for the template language. It was beautiful. It was pure, unsullied by Angular JS type stuff. So it was great. So what is React? React's been around for 4 years. It's component-based as well. It's just JavaScript and JSX. So aside from it not being Java, JavaScript will work. It's basically the V in MVC. And it has no ugly templates, but you could really work at it and try. Let's talk about the lifecycle of React. So if we were going to talk about Angular's lifecycle, it would probably be fairly crazy, and we would need 2 or 3 more hours to talk. But React is pretty simple. Number one, when your component gets mounted, it's going to call your constructor, and then it's going to call component will mount, and that's where you can do some pre-things that you need. Then it's going to call render, and render is where you're going to pass back your template, your HTML code. And then it's going to call component did mount, and that's where you're going to call anything that you need to do, like action creators, things that actually grab data from the back end. What have you. All right. And then throughout, when things get updated, because we live in a world where things get updated all the time via via the network, via certain actions that people take, because we're talking about single-page applications now. Updating is going to call these methods. So component will receive props, so if any new props come in, that's where it's going to happen. Should component update is a very important one, and one that 99% of the time you should never touch unless you're optimizing. And what do we say about premature optimization? It is the root of all evil, right? Donald Trump is the other one, but root of all evil so far, right now, is optimization. Component will update, render again, and then component did update. It's all very, very fun. And then one thing that React has done pretty nicely is its virtual DOM. The virtual DOM allows you to do fast DOM updates. It's only Java. It's basically just JavaScript objects. It's an in-memory representation of the DOM. In earlier specs of React, you could just write your code. Actually, you can still do this today, but you could write all your presentation code in just JavaScript. But let's be honest, that's painful and ugly. Render, of course, runs whenever something changes, and that's based on should component update. And then it's going to diff with the old one, and then it does batch executions, and that's where it gets a lot of its fun. So what's the conventions we're going to use for this talk? We're going to use ES6 because I hate JavaScript. Babel is great. We're using npm scripts because grunt and gulp are great if you're doing Node or whatever, but this is fine. I like grunt and gulp, but with React, there's a simpler way. We use Yarn instead of npm because it may not be superior, but I hate npm, so there you go. And Yarn was built by Facebook, and Facebook built React, so it goes to follow that that would be important. As with any framework, there is going to be a bootstrap, and Create React App is the bootstrap for React. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, let's take a quick look. First thing we're going to do. Somebody look. Okay. Make that smaller. Call it Hello World. So if the internet works, and I think it is, it's going to run through the 400,000 JavaScript libraries it took to do this. God, I wasn't far off. It's 19,825 dependencies. That's crazy. Okay. Oops. Okay, so first, it created a directory called Hello World, and now we're going to run. So we're going to use Yarn to run it. And we'll get a bare bones. I wasn't supposed to do that yet. As soon as you're done running your first app, Create React App. Create React App. I speak good English. All right, so let's look at the actual code. Pay no attention. Okay, so essentially it's got the node modules, which has a billion things in it. As always, public is where your main index.html is going to be. You can change the title, you can add your own things in here, whatever is needed, Facebook buttons and things. But here's what we really want to look at. So index.js is the entry point for the app. And we can see here that it's calling app. And let's look at what's inside here. A lot of stuff. Let's change this around a little bit though and make it a little bit simpler. So we're going to use something called a presentational component. And it's a little bit simpler than what they have here. How much experience do you guys have with JavaScript? Are you guys like mavens? Did I just offend like the guy who wrote JavaScript in here? Is he here? Of course. No. All right. Okay. Make a couple more changes. Alright, so I'm just going to go grab something that I think is cool. I mean, that's a great logo. So you can see pulling in images and CSS is just an import, an ES6 import. And that'll happen behind the scenes. It's not to be trifled with or worried about. React app deals with it for you. So we're just going to change this. We're going to do, oops. So when you pass in variables, that's the way it's going to look. And when you're using presentational components like this, you can pass them all in line like this by name. So let's save this. And we'll see that I screwed something up. Okay. All right. So let's make a couple changes to CSS, because why not? There. All right, so one thing that we don't see is we're not seeing the actual name variable, right? Why? They haven't actually passed it in yet, right? So if we come back to index.js, you notice that we have space here. Kind of fun. And then if we wanted to, we could create an app container, which will be more stateful. And because am I lazy? I'm not lazy. I'm kind of lazy. I want to type all that. So we're going to use a stateful component now, which you should get that. All right, we'll add a couple So what did we do here? Well, we had a stateless component. Eastman. What's this guy doing? He screwed up my flow. All right. So we had a stateless component called app, and it has no state at all. There's nothing you can, no methods to call, and it's just markup. That's all. And we pulled some of that functionality out into an app container. And what is the app container? Every React stateful component has a state object that you can use. SetState won't happen right away, so it'll happen when it happens. So probably the best thing to do here is not show that I was checking console.log, otherwise known as debugging in JavaScript. What you should probably do is something like, if this.state equals null, return nothing. One of the things about React that you'll have to pay attention to is sometimes your components are not going to have data, so you have to deal with that. But then we pass name and we pass state.name in with the component, and we have this beautiful rotating thing. I mean, it's amazing. All right, let's get back to it. All right, let's see. Night shift mode. What? No. No. Huh. I don't know where no idea where the actual thing is. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Okay, so we've seen this. These are stateless components. Most of these frameworks now have them in spades. We've seen this, and this is a stateful component. So SetState is going to update your state, but it's not. It's an eventual UI update, so do not depend on it running, and right away you'll have data in state. So you'll have to do it after. This is near impossible. All right, prop types. What are prop types like? Prop types are like, so you'll have properties that get passed in with your component, and prop types are a way for you to validate and annotate that this is the property that I was expecting. And they should be used, and they're good for that moment when 6 months from now, after you wrote this component, you look back on it and you go, now what was I supposed to pass in here? And prop types are the way that gets done. And with React, in dev mode, they will show as warnings, but not in production, because that would be stupid. Yeah, so, and props are the properties that get passed down to your component. So every component will have props, and it will have state. Okay, and yeah, so state, I'm just gonna pass this slide because I think I've talked too much about state. Let's look at an actual project. All right, so we're gonna quit this and come to my project called Mystic Paste React Go. And with any luck, the gods will smile on me, and we can load this. Okay, who here has used a paste bin before in their life? Yes. None of you? Like 5 of you. Nobody else has ever needed help in their JavaScript coding before? Come on, I've seen some of you on some of the help sites. Come on. All right. So this is a paste bin. It was originally written in Wicked, and it's been rewritten in React. Essentially, the idea is we can write code in here. Sure, we'll put this in here. Why not? It'll highlight. Oh, jeez. Come on. Works well. Maybe the internet works. So it does a very poor job of highlighting sometimes. But essentially, these are all components in React, and they yeah. So let's actually look at code. So each of these are pages. Do not include spam paste. See, this is the other really nice thing about paste bins is people try to spam them all the time. So if you guys want hacked PayPal accounts, whatever. All right. So what do we have? We have the new paste page. We have a history page, and like an about page. So if we look over here, we can see, and the convention with React has similarly been to use pages, containers, components, API actions. There's probably 100 articles out there on what to actually use, what method to use, but this is the one I like. And Mystic Paste uses something called Saga, Redux Saga, which is a bit complicated, but it works well. Okay, so if we look at new paste page, then we can see there's a new paste container, which is imported here. And my oh my, does that look complicated? It's really not though. We're setting our state by default here, like we did in the original example. And our render is where most of the work actually happens, right? So here's a text area, and we're using another component series called Semantic. Anybody use Semantic UI? It's pretty good. It's like the Bootstrap equivalent. And we have something called an action bar. Some of the nice things about using React is that you can make them components and call them what you want and put components inside components. It's really great. But we're passing in our functions, handle change. We're passing in creating a paste. And we're using state here to pass in the language, the code, and if it actually has code in it, which dictates. I'm pointing at my screen like you can see what I'm pointing at. It dictates if this is allowed to go or not, right? All right. and our create pace. So let's just drill down. Text area is pretty simple. Right. Everything with JSX, which is basically React templates, is looks like HTML or XML. Everything should be well formed as well. Our action bar is kind of is this bar here. So if we pull up some of our components here, we can see the action bar. And container there is just a semantic UI thing, and button is, they should put more batteries in this thing. Button is obviously the create pace, and you can see that we'll automatically disable it if there's no code. And then LanguageSelect is our language selector. We have language here. So yeah, so LanguageSelect is also another component. So we have a drop-down that has all the list of actual languages in it, and we're using a constant for that. And it's a lot of freaking languages. All right, and then our header is all up here. So everything is a nice separation of each of the components that exist. All right. So what are some resources for React that I like? I like Thinking React. It's a great tutorial series. With React 16 out, I'm hoping there is an update to that. And the React.js docs from Facebook are actually really quite good too. Let's talk about data for a moment. Redux is like Flux, but a single store and immutable. All right. So what is it? It's a better Flux implementation, because every one of these things are Flux implementations. It's a predictable state container, and there's no dispatcher. It's a single store, and it's immutable. I feel like this slide is repeating what I just said. What's going on? All right, so this is a typical Flux architecture, stolen from one of the many websites that show it. And this is a cool GIF of how things happen in Redux. You end up not having to deal with state yourself in a normal way. Your view will call an action, and that action may call an API, and that API will then call, I'm done with this. That API then is going to call into the store using reducers to pass back new objects that you'll need in your state. So reducers are, everything that gets passed back from a reducer has to be immutable. And there's a special library you can add to make sure that you're following that. And then what comes out of the state will get passed back into the view using a different method in your React component. So action creators. This is what you'll. This is similar to Flux in that you'll call these to do things in your application. So like one here is samepace. So I'm going to call the action creator for samepace, and I'm going to pass the code that that person has put in there. And it's going to return a type, which is just a constant of some kind. I'm calling it samepace, and the code. The reducer will then take that code and using really awesome ES6 type stuff, will combine the state with a new object called has to return state, no matter what. And of course, the initial state that gets passed back in is important because we want to have at least something there to look at. And these are the methods or functions that you would use within your application inside the component to pass back state and map dispatch the process. You can call it whatever you want, but this is kind of the convention is what they're calling it. So map state to props and map dispatch to props is how you'll pull data. So it's how you'll map your actions to properties in the application and how you'll map your state, which is going to come from Redux back into the props that can be used. And here we're using it's a high order component in React. So connect is basically something that Redux has cooked up. And we're going to look at some code here in a minute. So this is an action dispatch. So load paste by ID accepts a paste ID flag, and we're dispatching a paste action load paste by ID, which we saw back here, which is a different one, which doesn't make any sense that I would do that, but I'm going to show you code right now. Yeah, let's do that. All right, so if we look at new paste container, we're looking at create paste, right? And this .props.actions is an action creator. And if we wanted to save the paste, we're going to pass in the code, which we saw earlier, and the language. And as you can see here, so here I'm not even using the defaults because I can just do it this way. Because ES6 allows us to do all these funny smaller type things. So we're just returning paste. Let's just look here first. So the dispatch that we're returning is going to bind the action creators with paste actions. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that everything inside of paste actions, which is defined up here, all of these methods, functions, sorry, this is JavaScript, not Java. All these functions are going to be available to new paste container. All right. So bind action creators is a simple way for us to do that. So here's what happens. So I call save paste. It's going to pass that information to not that one. It's going to pass it to save paste here. We're going to create a new object. We're going to pass in code, language, and when it was created. And we're going to pass an action type. That action type is going to have this paste object. And then what's going to happen is the reducer is going to get run. Which will accept our, it's going to set things up so that we can save it to the database. Sagas would be a whole nother hour.